All right, so these chicks are getting huge. It's probably time to consider moving them from out of the brooder and into the coop. So let's see what that's all about and talk about a few more things to ensure you're ready for the coming chaos. Hey, I'm Tori. Welcome to the Omega Ready channel and video number 5 in our series on raising your own chickens. Today we're going to be talking about transferring your chicks from the brooder into their permanent home, the chicken coop. Hopefully you've already given this some thought and have your coop laid out, and maybe it's even ready to go. So regardless of where you're at, we're going to start by reviewing the requirements needed of a good chicken coop. I've also got some handy tips that can help save you some time and some money. So let's get to it. A coop is simply a structure used to house your chickens. The basic requirements of a coop are it needs to be large enough to hold all of your chickens. 2 square feet per bird for bantams, 4 square feet per bird for standard breeds, and 8 square feet per bird for heavy breeds. I've got an established flock here of about 30 mature chickens of various breeds. That would mean that they require 120 square feet of space. So my coop size is 24 feet wide by 16 feet long, which is about 380 square feet. So I've got more than ample space for my flock here. You will need a sturdy structure, preferably with a floor so nothing can dig underneath the walls. Doors need to close tightly and have a secure latch. Make sure there are no large gaps or seams that might allow predators to squeeze in. All right, so hey, let's talk about predators for a second. Chickens are very, very popular in the animal world, not just because of their awesome social skills or even because other animals find their company rewarding. Guessing it's mostly because they taste like chicken. They're quite prolific and efficient at turning insects, grass, and grains into protein, and since they don't fly very well, they're usually pretty easy pickings. So what exactly is a chicken predator? Well, technically speaking, we humans are their biggest predator, but that seems to be lost on them, so let's keep that between us for now. So typical predators include coyotes, raccoons, foxes, and weasels, and even dogs. Dogs seem to have a hard time resisting the urge to chase chickens that are running away from them. Then you've got the more nefarious category of airborne killers: falcons, hawks, eagles, and owls. These are harder to protect against, but we will go over some strategies once we talk about fencing coming up. So as you can see, there is an army of chicken adversaries out there all trying to make your day more difficult. You need to keep that in mind when planning your coop, and don't forget that old saying, an ounce of prevention saves a pound of chicken. Your coop also needs to be secure from the weather. Chickens are very hardy, especially if you've chosen a breed that is suitable for your climate. They can handle heat and cold, but only within reason. Probably the most important thing is to have good ventilation within the coop. Fresh air is important because a coop is typically a dusty environment because of the bedding and all the manure it holds. If you don't have adequate ventilation, then dust can cause breathing problems. Having venting up high can help with ventilation and also push hot summer air out of the coop. Even though good ventilation is necessary, the coop should not be drafty, especially in the wintertime. Chickens keep warm by rustling up their feathers to build up a layer of insulating air around their body. If your coop is drafty, then the wind can reduce the primary means they have for staying warm. Venting away from the prevailing winds in your area is a great idea. So also regarding wintertime, I sometimes hear that insulation and heat lamps are needed in the coop if you live in a nasty winter climate. I've not had any problems with frostbite or death during cold snaps down into the -20s. Like I said previously, keeping your coop free from drafts is probably the best cold weather insurance you can get. Also, another idea to help manage the cold is to ensure that you start building your bedding material up in late summer. Hold off on your next coop cleaning until spring and just keep adding wood shavings to offset their mess, and it will start to build a nice layer of ground insulation. All right, so your flock will obviously need access to food and water. Ensure that you have adequate space available for all your birds to eat and drink. Space requirements are listed below in the details. Perches. We discussed the details on perches in episode 4, so I'm only going to discuss the general placement of the perches in this video. Having your perch as far away from the door as possible is a good idea. Preferably, it will be up against one, or better yet, two walls. This has the benefit of boxing them in a little bit and preventing any potential predators from sneaking up on them when they are in the coop. My coop has 3 separate perches inside, a few corner perches, and additionally, some of the bantams like to fly up into the joists at night to roost. The standard breeds won't fit up there, so these bantams use their small size to their advantage. Also, a handy little secret about perches. I use hinges to mount the top of my perch to the coop wall. This way, when it's time to clean out the bedding, all I have to do is raise the perch up to have unfettered access to everything below it. Electricity in your coop is not mandatory, but it's certainly helpful. If you are in an area that gets below freezing, having electricity allows for things like water heaters so your water dispensers won't freeze. Having lighting in your coop is also quite helpful, although again, it's not mandatory. Last item here is bedding or litter. Your coop needs a nice layer, about 4 inches of wood shavings to help absorb the chicken's manure. You want it evenly spread out across the floor of the coop, paying particular attention to the areas under your perch and at the entrance or exit of the coop. These areas seem to collect more manure than the other areas. You'll be adding shavings on a regular basis as it gets compacted over time. If your coop smells of manure or ammonia, that means that you aren't using enough bedding material. Stay on top of this because breathing in ammonia isn't good for their health or yours, and it won't be a pleasant place for anyone to be in. A few times a year, you will be cleaning out the coop and adding a complete fresh layer of bedding. I like to do this in early spring and late summer. This generally keeps it clean enough, and like I said previously, it starts to build up a nice thick layer of wood shaving insulation for the winter months here in Michigan. The spring cleanup of the coop is usually the more difficult one since I've been accumulating bedding since August of the previous year. Also, don't forget, wood shavings with chicken manure is an excellent source of composting material. This stuff is chock full of nitrogen and will help any garden kick it into high gear. So start making plans on how you will compost your bedding material and your manure come your first clean out, because you won't want to waste all that free nitrogen. So here at the Omega Ready Ranch, we like to add some new birds to the flock to keep things fresh every few years. I've built a simple coop within a coop by putting up a temporary wall. This becomes a temporary coop for the chicks before being introduced to the flock. I use lattice since it's small enough to keep the chicks on their side and the mature chickens on theirs, but it also allows them to see, hear, and smell what each other's all about. This has worked very well in the past. After a month or so of this, the temporary walls come down and everyone is one big, happy, dysfunctional flock. Okay, so your coop is all set. It's safe and secure, draft-free, has good ventilation, and has everything they need to comfortably exist. Now it's time to physically move them from the brooder into their new home. A good starting point is to move the feed and water dispensers into the coop ahead of the move. Having these obstacles out of the way inside the brooder will make getting a hold of them a little bit easier. The process itself is pretty straightforward. You're just going to grab a chick and move them from A to B. They aren't going to be too happy about it and will raise some degree of protest, but that's what you should expect from a chicken. Carefully grab them, 1 or 2 at a time, and place them into the coop. They'll initially be quite vocal and uncertain of their new surroundings, but they will get used to it. In no time at all, they will start to investigate and get the feel for their new surroundings. I think that it's a good idea to let them acclimate to their new coop for a week or 2. I'd lean more towards 2 weeks, before letting them outside for the first time. I find that this helps them to understand that the coop is the place that they roost and that where they are safest. This will make your life easier a few weeks down the road once you let them outside for the first time. They will instinctively know where they're going to roost and therefore come in all by themselves as dusk approaches. But also don't be surprised, there's always a few free thinkers out there that need reminding that it's time to get inside where it's safe. If you choose not to do this, then consider yourself warned. There's only a few things quite as fun as trying to herd a flock of chickens somewhere they don't want to go. This 2-week delay before letting them outside goes a long way to minimize having to herd them around. So while they're acclimating to their new coop, you've got some time to prepare their designated outdoor area. This is typically called a pasture, range, or a run. Whatever you call yours, it's going to need some fencing to keep chickens in and predators out. Fencing options are plentiful. I've had excellent success with red brand wire fencing. The stuff I use is overkill. It's meant for cattle, I think, but that's fine because I know it's going to last. I use the 47-inch and or the 60-inch tall woven wire field fence. It's got small 3-inch openings on the bottom and larger openings on the top. This is a good strong fence that does an excellent job. I've not had a single problem with any land predators since I've been using this fence. I put it in with wood corner posts and T-posts using these wire fencing clip bender tools that you can find at your local ag store. You don't have to have a gated entrance to your pasture, but I found that it helps with getting quick access if I need it. It also means that I don't need to go through the coop to access the pasture for things like feeding scraps or whatever. It also makes cleaning the coop out a bit more manageable. So within your pasture or your run, you may want to consider making a few paddocks. This means adding some fencing inside of the pasture. Why? Well, chickens are nature's great omnivores. They will eat damn near anything: insects, grasses, weeds, plants, rodents, snakes, and seeds. If left in one spot too long, though, they will wear that area out. Vegetation won't grow and you'll be left with a big area of dirt that gets muddy and soupy every time it rains. Paddocks allow you to let your chickens feed on one area while the remaining paddocks get time to rest and regrow. You can put them on an alternating schedule that will keep them on fresh forage, which helps reduce your feeding requirements. While this isn't mandatory, it is good management. Give it some thought so that you can plan your fencing and gates accordingly. I've chosen not to do this with my pasture in the past, and I certainly regret that. That was a bad decision. But that's being addressed this year. I'm switching my birds over to a free-range enclosure where I'll be using a movable coop and movable fencing to keep them on fresh pasture all the time. That'll be a topic for a future video. So what else do chickens need when they're outside? Well, if you've done a good job with your fencing and they have access to the coop for grabbing food and water as needed, and also for seeking protection if things get dicey, then about the only thing left is maybe some small structures to help keep them safe from birds of prey. I built some crude structures that offer a few benefits. We've also recycled some old playground equipment we got for free, and although unusual, it does seem to help. These structures can give some shade from the hot summer sun, protection from rain and wind if so desired, and most importantly, a spot to hide in if they're too far away from the coop when those airborne predators come a-calling. Also, another cool thing that we discovered by accident: place some bricks or pavers or even logs in random areas in your run. Every few weeks, you can move these items and the chickens will have an abundance of worms and bugs that was underneath that item that they can eat up. They'll spend time scratching around in that fresh dirt as well, because a lot of the bugs are right underneath the surface. So then you can repeat that process every few weeks. Okay, so let's spend a little bit of time on feed, because your chicks, as they approach maturity, are going to need to change up their diet. Most likely you have been feeding your chicks a 20% protein crumble feed, and you will continue to do so until they hit about 20 weeks. As they start getting closer to their laying age, which is around 24 weeks, then you should be switching them off of the higher protein chick feed. Now, why would you do that? Well, when they're developing, they need that extra protein to build muscles and grow feathers. But once they're close to maturity, they don't need that as much. So you can switch to a lower protein feed and save yourself some money in the process. So let's classify feeds into 3 types: manufactured, grains, and pasture. Manufactured feeds are broken down mainly by their protein content. 24% is usually used for raising freak of nature hybrid meat birds. 20% protein is used as a chick starter, and 16% is what they call a layer ration. Manufactured feeds typically come in 2 forms, a crumble form and a pellet form. The manufactured foods are simple to deal with and contain all of the nutrients and ingredients needed to keep them healthy. So assuming at the moment you're on a 20% crumble, you may choose to stay on manufactured feeds. They're certainly more convenient to use, but you pay for that convenience. I did manufactured feeds when I started my flock, and I was quite disturbed to see how expensive my eggs were relative to what I could buy at the store. Most of that cost from my side came from the cost of the feed. So if on the other hand you enjoy making life more difficult for yourself, but like the idea of saving some fairly considerate money in the process, you can switch your feed to a mixed grain. This is my preferred method, and I'll share my recipe below in the details. Like any good meal out there, though, there's lots of different recipes that people swear by, so you should have no issue finding other examples of what other people have used and had success with. So where can you buy the individual ingredients that you need to make your feed? You can do it at any of the big ag stores. They sell the individual items and you mix it together yourself. A lot of small rural towns also have grain elevators or feed shops, and they have these ingredients, and they already may have a mix together that you could just buy as a whole, which will save you some hassle. And lastly is farmers, directly from farmers. If you can find a farmer that grows what you need, you cut out the middleman and can save some significant money. So the last item on that list was pasture. As I said earlier, chickens are omnivores and will eat almost anything. So let nature do some of the work for you by keeping your chickens on fresh grass. That will allow them the opportunity to get some of their own diet via the grass, weeds, seeds on the ground, even bugs. In their natural environment, they would get 100% of their food this way. So they are equipped with the tools and the smarts to get it done. You just need to give them the opportunity. So the more they can be like natural chickens, then the less you will need to provide them. But even with good lush pasture, you'll find that you'll probably need to supplement them with some additional feed. So make sure they get all the nutrition they need. Okay, so you've decided on what you plan to feed them. Now what? Be careful that you don't change their food all over at once. It's a good idea to transition them into a lower protein feed by mixing the feeds together over the course of a few weeks. At about week 20, I start changing their protein ratio every 5-day increments. Starting at day 1 is a 25% low protein to 75% high. Then day 5, it's a 50-50 mix. Day 10, 75-25. And by day 15, they're on the new food. So if you're going to be switching to grains, then just mix that in with the crumble as you transition. Same goes for pellets. So just remember, abrupt changes to diet can give chickens digestive hiccups. And let me warn you, chickens with digestive problems are chickens that are typically best avoided. So in addition to changing their diet up, you need to be aware of 2 more things. Pullets and hens need a calcium supplement to ensure that their eggs have hard shells. In nature, they get the calcium from hard-shelled insects that they eat and certain types of plants. So while my birds have access to any insect that's going to wander into the pasture, I still choose to keep a calcium supplement handy that they can grab as they need. That second item, though, is grit. Like we touched on in episode 1, chickens don't have any teeth. They store their food in their craw. They use small stones or a commercial version of that called grit, which stays in their craw to break up the food before it goes into their stomach. Now, if you haven't used it yet, don't sweat it. It's cool. Chicks don't need the grit if they're eating crumble. It's soft enough that it breaks up. It's only when they start eating harder things like grains and seeds that they will need that grit. So no teeth, right? Sounds a little nuts. But now you've learned 2 critical things from this. Number 1, that they need access to small stones or grit for breaking up their food. And more importantly, number 2, now you know where the term "stuck in my craw" comes from. So if your flock has access to pasture, then they will find their own stones. I don't give my flock any grit whatsoever, and regardless of their generally negative disposition, they seem to be fine without it. Last item on feed is something you've likely heard a lot about, and that's feeding your chickens table scraps. They will eat almost anything you put in front of them. So you need to know that there are some things you shouldn't feed chickens. This would include very strongly flavored foods like onions, garlic, citrus, or fish. These can impart an off taste to their eggs. I would probably stay away from anything spicy like ghost peppers, habaneros, or jalapenos too. That said, they are omnivores and can handle plenty of foods that we enjoy as well. We regularly give our chickens breadcrumbs, lettuce, green pepper cores, apple cores, melons, and even stale popcorn. At Thanksgiving, they get the turkey carcass, and at Christmas and Easter, the ham bone. In the wintertime, we make an effort to do this more frequently because they aren't getting any food from the pasture, and a nice treat helps break up the monotony of gray Michigan winters. And also, apparently this needs to be said, don't feed them moldy food. Mushy food's okay, but no mold, man, that's just gross. All right, so there you have it. Everything needed to prepare for the transition from the brooder to the coop. Keep an eye out for our next video on monitoring the flock's health and preparing your coop for egg-laying madness. So, we'll see you then.